So, a few weeks ago, I had the pleasure of debating socialism versus capitalism with my friend Martin Henley, who is from the UK. So, Martin and I have very different backgrounds. So, it was exciting to have this conversation. There's not a lot of these kinds of conversations happening right now. It's usually either, people shouting from opposite ends of the spectrum or battling it out on Twitter with no more than 120 characters or whatever the limit is. But Martin and I spent almost 2 hours going back and forth and having a dialogue about what we view as the right political system, if there is such a thing. And I think in the grand scheme of things, maybe we didn't really come to clear enough definitions to really suss out this topic, but we did undoubtedly both learn some things, and I think some interesting things were brought up in this conversation that maybe weren't really about political ideology, but were just more about the philosophy and what it's like to grow up and just be a human in different parts of the world. One example that sticks out is, Martin grew up in Europe. He grew up in the UK. In European countries, first of all, they have a lot of history. Those countries have been around for a long time. And there's a lot of countries that are very close together that have very different histories. And so if you live in Europe, it's really easy to travel around to different countries that have this different deep, rich history. And so you are automatically exposed to a lot more worldliness, for lack of a better term. And you contrast that with growing up and being a human in the United States. We're very isolated in the United States. We're all American here. We don't have, we are a melting pot of the world, sure, but we don't have that super deep, rich history. What has united Americans throughout the history of the United States has been America itself, the United States itself, being a United States citizen, enjoying the rights granted by the Constitution, or protected rather. That's what has historically united people in this country. But in this day and age, we have the internet. People don't need something to unite them as much because they're able to find their own tribes on the internet. And it was interesting just considering and pondering the difference between being, or growing up in a country like the UK versus the United States, and how I could see that shaping the way that you view politics and how a country should be managed. But I think that this was an interesting talk. I hope you enjoy it. I'd love to hear what you think in the comment section below, and enjoy the podcast. Board this thing. All right, we've got Martin here, Martin Henley, out of Bali. We're here to talk about whatever we want to talk about.
Good. There's something I really want to talk about.
Oh, really? What is that?
Well, I'm probably the only person who watched all the way through your first conversation with your cousin. And at one point, you said a couple of things, like you and I really get on, I think. And you and I have very similar sensibilities, and we have similar kind of influences. And I really like you.
Oh, well, thanks.
That's okay. So, and we have similar interests like photography and stuff. Mm-hmm. The difference between us, I think, is that I am a socialist and I have socialist kind of sensibilities or leanings, and you clearly don't. So there were two things, one much less so. There were two things that you said that kind of not triggered me, but piqued my kind of. Here's what you said. You said the thing about socialism is that socialism has never worked. And I think there's kind of three things in there. There's the idea that you know what socialism is and you understand the history of socialism. And kind of the big thing behind that, because this is something that Americans say all the time, it's like a trope, they just say it. The suggestion that the American system is actually the best system. And for the life of me, I can't imagine how anyone could possibly believe that. Because what I think you've got is what every American I've ever spoken to has had, which is this really deep-rooted, really unshakable, really unquestionable kind of patriotism and commitment to your system. Do you know what I mean? And I have absolutely no idea where that comes from, because by any measure, I couldn't imagine that America is the best system. So I really want to understand that, because I've never even seen this conversation happen. I've never seen this question asked. Where does this weird patriotism, this kind of, what do they call it, blinkered view of your society come from, that you have so much faith in it, especially right now, when it seems to me that things could not possibly be worse in the United States of America. Mm-hmm. I mean, they can be worse, but like by any measure of a society, you'd have to say that America is in trouble right now. So that's what I want to talk about. Are you happy to have that conversation?
Yeah, absolutely.
Good. So where do we start then? Do you know what socialism is?
Well, let me just read the definition real quick, and then.
Okay.
Well, actually, hold up. Before I read that, why don't you tell me what you think socialism is? Because you obviously know more about it than I do.
Okay. So just to give you a heads up, I have a degree in politics.
Okay.
And I studied kind of political philosophy. This was like 30 years ago when you were barely born. So I do know about this stuff. I have read this stuff. It was a long time ago. But so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put up a definition on the screen so everyone can see where this definition comes from. So I'm literally going to search what is socialism, and we'll see the definition that comes up. Right, so this is the number one definition. All right, so socialism is a political, and is that big enough? And I can make that bigger.
Yeah,
I can. Political and economic theory of social organization, which advocates that the means of production, distribution, and exchange should be owned or regulated by the community as a whole. What's the definition that you've got?
Oh, it's the same one. That's the one I pulled up.
Okay, cool. So what does that mean to you? And what is wrong with that? That's what I'm interested to know.
Okay. So I guess I'll just do my best to explain my stance on that. So yesterday I had a conversation with a friend, and he was asking me about universal basic income. So would you say that universal basic income is a socialist policy?
I would say that probably universal basic income is a socialist policy, yes.
Okay. So my thought on that is, I think it'd be great if everybody could get $2,000 a month. In fact, I think it'd be great if everyone could get $10,000 a month. But what would happen how would we do that, first of all, and then what would happen? One thing that would happen, if everybody had more money, it doesn't mean that there would be more goods and services to go after. So we would see a raise in prices as people had more money to spend on the same amount of goods and services. So that's one way that it'd become harder to buy stuff, or, it would become less impactful to get that money because the price of everything would go up. And then the other side of it is, where does that money come from? So, in nature or any society, there's producers and consumers. And in order to, create value or earn money, you have to produce something. But if the government gives money for nothing, for no production, where does that money come from?
Well, it could come from taxing producers, or the money can be created, out of nowhere, like money's printed now. So what happens if money's just printed? Well, it takes value from all the other money that's out there already, right? Because nothing's being produced. And so it's like, obviously it'd be great if everybody had everything they needed. But from a practical standpoint, I don't see how it can work, how it can function, or that it would be sustainable. Does that make sense?
No,
It doesn't?
that makes absolutely no sense whatsoever.
What part doesn't make sense?
Well, the idea that a universal basic income would be inflationary, that makes sense. Okay, so I'll give you something. Some of this made sense. But you've gone to another place entirely, because you are so rooted in this idea of capital, in capitalism, that there has to be profit somewhere. There has to be like more benefit in money to some people than others. But I think we've gone in the wrong direction already. I think like a universal basic income, the thing that you said, that's the truth, is that everybody could have everything they need. So it's not about everything that everybody wants. It's just about people getting what they need. Now, personally, I believe that there's enough resource in the world. Well, personally, I believe that everyone is getting the absolute minimum they need because they're staying alive, or most people. It's very few people on the planet now who are dying because they don't have access to food or water or shelter. There are people, but it's much less people than there were historically. So, and that is happening currently under this capitalist system, and there is profit, there is spare, there is capital. So there is a margin being made on people getting what they need. So if you were to take that margin away, then there would maybe be more of what people need. Maybe people would start getting more than just what they need. They would start getting what they need to live a fulfilled life, potentially. Mm-hmm. I don't want to get away from this idea. Like, you are clearly anti-socialism. So let's come back to this definition. It is a political and economic theory of social organization which advocates that the means of production, distribution, and exchange should be owned or regulated by the community as a whole. Mm-hmm. So what about that? Because I think socialism is offensive to Americans, and I want to understand why. Mm-hmm. So what is it about that idea that the means of production, distribution, and exchange are regulated by the entire community, as opposed to a very few people in government or a very few people at the top of corporations? Because that, for me, is the alternative.
So, first of all, I'm not anti-socialist. I just don't see how it can work at scale. I could see how it could work.
We can come to that. You've said already it doesn't work.
So, well, because we're talking about how to run countries, how to manage resources and societies with millions and billions of people, right?
Yes. So which societies has socialism been implemented in, and where has it failed? That's what I'm interested to know for you.
I would argue that it's being implemented in the United States through government subsidies of education, healthcare.
Yes, that's true.
That kind of stuff. And it's being implemented all over the place, and alongside
and it's not working.
Well, I mean, it's debatable. Like, I don't know anywhere that it's completely socialist and working. It's like Netherlands, for example, they have it's like socialist healthcare, socialist education, but they have extremely capitalist, private business. They're very good to businesses, and so it allows them to prosper. But let's go back to the definition real quick. So let me look at the definition. Okay, so the means of production, distribution, exchange should be owned and regulated by the community as a whole. So I can see that being possible in a small community, but how would that work in a country with 350 million people?
Okay, so there is only one country with 350 million people, which is the United States.
Yeah.
So we can look at Holland and say, okay, how is this working for a country with 5 or 6 million people is the population of Holland? And it is working. Do you know how many people are in jail in Holland?
No,
Have a guess.
I have no idea. I don't even know how many people live in Holland.
5 to 6 million people. I've just told you that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you did. Okay, yeah, I
Okay.
don't know.
There are 0 people in jail in Holland.
Wow, that's surprising.
That is surprising. I mean, that's unbelievable. So I almost don't believe it, but I did Google it. I've Googled lots of numbers in preparation for this conversation. 0 people in jail. So that, for me, would suggest that it's working in that society. So the thing about this definition that we're looking at is that it's a political and economic theory of social organization which advocates the means of production, distribution, and exchange should be owned or regulated by the community as a whole. Now, for me, this is actually, if you take all of the means of production, distribution, and exchange, then that, for me, is communism. That is absolutely and that is communism. And when you think of the state actually being completely owning the means of production, distribution, and exchange, the state specifically, then that is the kind of communism that we saw in Russia and China and Vietnam and Cuba and those kinds of places.
Mm-hmm.
So that, for me, is communism, as we understand communism. Socialism is somewhere between this situation where all of the means of production, distribution, exchange are owned by the community, and capitalism where none of the means of production are. So socialism would be, for me, countries like the North Scandinavian countries. So like you say, Holland, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, they own some, like the government are in control of some of the means of production, distribution, and exchange. And what those things are things that are necessary, like you say, healthcare, education, transportation, all of these things. So that, for me, is socialism. So, and all of these things happen on a scale. So from where I'm sitting, we have abject, runaway, unfettered capitalism, but you're right, there are still elements of socialism in it. You still have a government, you still have them making investments in transportation, defense, blah, 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 blah. So there are socialist aspects to that, but the United States is probably the most capitalist society on the planet. And we're not talking about a free market capitalism like Locke spoke about. You know, we're not talking about that. We're talking about some weird, corrupt corporatism, because it seems to me that actually the power has shifted away from government towards corporations in the United States. That is the effect, for me, of unfettered capitalism. On the other end of the extreme, you've got China, who are a communist state where the state actually is we don't know exactly, but we imagine that the state is in full control of the means of production, distribution, and exchange. Although there is a lot of private enterprise going on in China, look at DJI and companies like that. Mm-hmm. So not 100% in control, but in control of a lot. And then in the middle, we have maybe more or less socialist countries, because it's happening on a scale. So between the United States and between China is everybody else, okay? And I would say that socialist policies are, for example, policies where they accept that services should be available to the population. So even in the United States, defense is effectively the means of production, distribution, and exchange. In terms of defense, the money comes from the government. So the government should be in control, apart from you've got this perverted thing where the lobbyists are probably running things more than they should. Transportation, same gig. In the United States, policing, for example, these are essentially government-run supposedly community-run services that even in the United States, the most capitalist country on the planet, has accepted have to be run by governments. Now, in more socialist states like the United Kingdom, we accept that healthcare also should be run and managed by the community. It's also corrupt to fuck. In more socialist states like Denmark specifically, they have much higher taxation and education. So in the UK, it's education and healthcare. And in Holland, in Denmark, they have much higher taxation, and it's more healthcare and more education. So these things, like you can call them different things, but they're all happening on a scale. Everyone is more or less socialist.
Yeah,
I
definitely.
said a lot then, didn't I? So then I would say the difference between the United States and, say, Denmark is just how much is kind of the drive to actually make sure that people benefit from the society. Does that make sense?
I think so.
Or are protected by the society?
Yeah, I mean, socialism, like the way that you talk about it and the way that I hear people that are pro-socialism talk about it, it sounds very like idealistic. Like, and like I agree that I want everyone to have everything they need. Like I definitely do. Um, but I think that can happen in a free market too.
Is it happening in the United States?
Well, the United States isn't a free market, so that's not really a great example. Just like saying the Netherlands socialism works in the Netherlands, well, part of it is socialism, but part of it isn't. And capitalism's getting a really bad rap these days. And it's like, oh, everything bad is because of capitalism, but it's not a capitalist free market. Maybe at one time the United States was, but it hasn't been for a really long time.
So it's not, yeah. So is the United States not a consequence of free market? Because communism never got, because those states failed, communism never got to its natural conclusion. Whereas you could say that capitalism probably is getting to its conclusion in the United States, because you've had this for whatever it is, 250 years. And the situation that's come about is the result of capitalism.
Well, you could say it's the result of capitalism because it started that way, but it's changed and it isn't capitalism anymore because there's.
Why did it change? How did it change?
Well, I think a big part of it was the monetary system. The monetary system became not backed by anything, and it gave the government the ability to create money out of nothing to pay for stuff. And that led to the ability to basically live beyond our means, and provide socialistic policies that were aimed to help certain communities. But I think there's some evidence that would say that they didn't actually help, that giving people some stuff might not, help them like it's intended to. Like the education system. So the government guaranteed these loans. So people have to be able to get these loans, which enabled the colleges to raise the prices of education. And the feedback loop continued until now you've got kids graduating hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. Like how that would have never happened in a free market. But the government getting involved and implementing socialist ideas or policies allowed that to happen. And the same thing's happening with healthcare. Is guaranteeing healthcare has allowed healthcare providers to raise prices, insurance companies to raise prices, really. And it's made healthcare or insurance so freaking impossible to pay for on your own. That most people, well, not most people, but a lot of people don't even have insurance because they can't afford it anymore. But like
most people don't have insurance.
Yeah, unless they have like the government guaranteed insurance. They call like Obamacare or something.
Something, yeah.
But
right. So what you're saying is interesting, because what you're saying is that in these three things, production, distribution, and exchange, what the government has done is it's provided money for the exchange, but it hasn't been in control of the distribution or the production, which has enabled the suppliers of those things to hike the prices, which means that they've just, You see, what you're saying doesn't actually make sense, because if the government were providing healthcare, like education, then nobody would come out with any debt. Do you know what I mean? Because the government would have paid for it.
Yeah, but the government doesn't provide the education. They just guarantee the loans for it. But
The
this
loans,
this
yes.
this is a good subject. So how does the government produce anything?
The government doesn't produce anything. The government actually, the government produces revenues from taxation. That's exactly what the government does.
Okay. So if with that definition of socialism, the means of production, distribution, and exchange should be owned and regulated by the community as a whole. But who would be doing that regulating? Because you can't get 350 million people to make a decision, right? You need a government.
You need a government, yes.
So the government would own the means of production.
In
Or the people.
communism, yeah. So in communism, that's what happens. The government owns all of the means of production, distribution, and exchange. Socialism is somewhere between that communism, the government owning everything, and capitalism, the government owning nothing and allowing the free markets to do its thing. You know, so
But the definition of socialism is the means of production, distribution, and exchange should be owned or regulated by the community as a whole. So how does the community own or regulate something without a government, right?
yeah. No, I'm saying that's it. It's the government. It's
Okay.
governments that do that, and various levels of governments do that.
So the really the only way to manage this many people is to have, you know, like some kind of republic. I mean, you can't really have a democracy with this many people because you can't really, you know, like that's the problem with democracy is you've got a lot of people voting that don't really know what they're talking about. Like that's what the Greeks, Aristotle, Socrates, they would always call that out about a democracy is, you know, you've got a mob making decisions isn't always the best thing, which was why the founding fathers of the United States made it a constitutional republic. But going back to socialism, it has to end up being some kind of government controlling controlling the means of production, at least controlling it, maybe not owning it.
Some of the means of production.
So what is the rest of it?
The rest of it might be free market, capitalism style stuff.
Okay. Well, do
you understand the definition I'm
doesn't-
making? It's like
the definition of socialism doesn't say some of it. It just says the production, distribution, and exchange should be owned and regulated by a community as a whole. So that's what socialism is. Socialism doesn't mean half capitalism.
no, but that's what I'm trying to explain to you is that this isn't actually a definition, I don't think, of socialism. I think this is communism.
Okay.
And in the way that we saw communism so actually socialism, if socialism is a thing, like, so you're right, there aren't socialists. I don't think you could, like, it would be a social communist state if it owned all of the means of production, like they did in Russia and China.
Yeah,
and
because
Vietnam,
if the government's
Cuba,
responsible for
Cambodia.
production, the only way it can produce is by getting the people to produce. And if the people already have everything they need, they're not going to want to work, but we're still going to need production. So they're going to be forced to work. And that's
so explain that to me. Explain that to me. So if they've got everything they need, they're not going to want to work. And if they've got everything, but we're still going to need production. What production do we need? If everyone's got everything they need.
If everyone has all the food they need, where does it come from?
Well, it comes from where it's always come from. It's grown, or it's
but it's
agriculture.
It's grown and harvested by people. But if those people get everything they need given to them, who's going to want to grow the food?
Well, if they've already got all the food they need, why do they need to grow any more food? That's what I want to understand.
Well, somebody has to grow the food, right? Who does it?
The people.
Yeah, but which people? I get food given to me. I don't want to leave my house. I'd rather just stay home. Who's going to make the
Oh,
food?
because you think, okay, I don't really understand what you're saying. So you're saying if a certain proportion of the population are responsible for growing the food and they grow all the food they need, who's going to grow the food for the rest of the population? Is that what you're saying?
No, what I'm saying is right now I'm incentivized to produce so that I could buy the things that I need. But if I already had the things I needed given to me, I wouldn't have the incentive to go work. And no, if everybody got what they need, what are they just going to wake up and be like, I'm going to go do hard labor because I want to? They won't, but someone's going to have to do it. And my point is, inevitably, like in communism, the government will have to force people to do stuff. And I think that's incredibly wrong.
Because you think people aren't motivated to do stuff unless they're forced to do it. Is that what you're saying?
I mean, pretty much. Like, I don't think anybody would do hard labor unless they were incentivized.
What is the requirement for hard labor? What does society need people to be doing hard labor?
Growing food.
Oh, you think growing food is hard labor? Okay.
Building houses. Building roads.
Yeah.
I mean, everything. Nothing's super easy.
Nothing super easy apart from what you and I do, which is marketing. That's super easy.
Pretty easy.
So, but I've dug the roads. You know, when I was 17, 18, 19, that was my job. I was laying tarmac on the roads. It's the best job I ever had. I love that job.
Really?
But I wasn't doing that out of the goodness of my heart. I was getting paid, and I was getting paid quite well because it was, maybe as you described it, hard labor.
Yeah.
But I think, what do I think? I'm not a communist. I'm not I mean, I might be a communist. I do. So if you read Marx, for example, well, I think, here's what I think. The reason that I'm a socialist is because I think society should exist for the benefit of everyone in it. And clearly, that's an entirely sensible proposition. Jordan Peterson said this when he was talking to Joe Rogan. He said, look, this is like, people need to feel that they're getting a fair deal, because if they don't, the wheels will come off, like the French Revolution. You know what I mean? They overthrew the state because it got to the point where they were revolting against the conditions. And so it seems to me eminently sensible that a society should take care of everybody in that society so that they don't have revolutions. That, you know, it's like, where is that point? Now, I would say, I don't know, I would say that the violent conflict that you've seen in your country, up to the point where they stormed the Capitol building like 2 weeks ago, looks frighteningly revolutionary. Like a large percentage of not a large, but a large number of people were calling for the defunding of the police, to take the police away throughout 2020. What is that? You know, these people are dismissed as being Marxists, but I would say they don't understand Marxism. But they're calling for that's I don't know. What do you call that? What does that look like to you? Does that look to you like a society that's functioning perfectly well?
Okay, so just to clear the air on this, I definitely don't think America is doing too hot right now. And I think that it's been slowly going downhill for a while. You asked earlier about the deep-seated patriotism. First of all, a lot of that was from propaganda and just from the general spirit of, we all need to unite together. We can all call ourselves Americans and we can all have that in common. So let's round ourselves up around that. I was just talking to a friend of mine about this yesterday. You know, in the internet age, the way I described it is like, I'm walking around my neighborhood and I don't know any of my neighbors, but I can imagine like looking at all their houses and seeing these beams coming out, going all different directions. And these are the connections they have with people in other locations through the internet, like doing a video call like this. They're connected to people all over the place, but they're not connected to anyone that's physically around them. And I think that this has something to do with the breakdown of patriotism, because you no longer have to find something in common with the people around you. You can go online and find communities of people that you have tons in common with. So, you know, it breaks down the need of us to be patriots. But that doesn't answer the question.
Doesn't answer the question. The question is, do you believe that the American system is the best political system that is available? Is that what you believe?
I think that the Constitution made it the best system. I think protecting
and
individual...
do you believe it is the best system?
Yeah, I think protecting individual liberty is the best.
Right, so let's talk about the hypocrisy here, because this is just blows my mind. So what is the line in your song where it says the home of the free and the land of the brave, something like that?
Yeah, that's right.
The national anthem. Okay, so do you know that 25% of all of the people who are in prison in the world are imprisoned in the United States? That you have more than 2 million people incarcerated right now.
Yeah.
0.7% of your population.
Yeah.
So by what you are, by definition, the least free people on the planet.
Look, I didn't say America is the best system. I said the Constitution is
made it the best system, is what you said.
Yeah, I think it started out in a great place and it's since gone somewhere different. I think it's horrible that we have so many people in prison, especially for petty drug crimes and stuff. Like it's just ridiculous. It's become
Why is that though?
I think
why do you have so many people in prison?
Honestly, I think a big part of it is corruption, like corruption in politics,
yes.
Corruption in changing the
what kind of corruption is
changing
that?
The rules of the game to line people's pockets. I think that's a big
yes.
part.
Okay, cool. So they haven't changed the rules of the game. The game is because like you say, the Constitution protects the freedoms or the rights of the individual, but actually you've got 2 million people in jail. So those freedoms haven't been protected. Those people are not free in any way, shape or form. Mm-hmm. So the game is the same as the game is in everything that happens in the United States, because for me, it's unfettered individualism and unfettered capitalism and unfettered profiteering. So you have in the United States a prison industrial complex. People are making a shit ton of money out of people going to prison. Mm-hmm. Judges who sit on the boards of these companies and take dividends from these companies who own the prisons are sending people to prison. So clearly it's corruption. And you could say exactly the same about your healthcare. It's corrupt. Like not only like 45,000 people a year die in the United States because they don't have access to healthcare. 500,000 people a year are bankrupted trying to cover their healthcare costs. That's 500,000 people a year. That's 5 million people every 10 years bankrupted because they don't have access to healthcare. And it's corruption because those companies are making huge profits out of this situation. Mm-hmm. You know, so it is corruption. It is corruption. That's what it is. But it's institutional corruption and it's the same with the industrial military complex. Like they get $600 billion to $800 billion of your money, of taxpayers' money, to go and drop bombs on other countries. There's huge profit in those things. So it seems to me that the corruption of these huge industries, it's probably the same in transportation, education, all of these things. The whole thing has become corrupted. So there is no individual freedom anymore. There is the whole country is in the grip of these 3 or 4 industries. Mm-hmm. And I mean, it's shocking if you look at the figures about what is going on in the United States. Like,
no, I agree.
Shocking. And nobody's talking about this. Okay, good. So if the United States isn't the best system, if you look around the world, where do you think the best system is?
Well, first of all, like I believe in the Constitution. I think that was a really great way to.
That was 250 years ago, man. It's
Well, I
like,
know, but that's I
and
mean,
where
you,
you've
you
gone is a result of that Constitution.
yeah, but is it like the Constitution doesn't say thou shalt lock a bunch of people in prison? That was something else added on
No,
by
but
by
the
someone else.
Constitution is the cornerstone. That was the starting point. And this is where you've got to. So you have to say that where you've got to has to be a result of where you started, no?
Well, no, not necessarily. I mean,
Because
you know,
what happened?
you were somebody was born 40 years ago and then went and robbed a bank and killed two people. Is it because they were born that they went and robbed a bank and killed people?
No, but well, yeah, because they couldn't have done. If they weren't born, they couldn't have done that.
Yeah, but you know,
But that's
I
so,
don't,
you know, but
you
you
can't
can't say
blame,
like
you can't blame a document
the
that protects.
foundations of your political system are the Constitution. You know, this is different. It's like you could say, you know, your analogy doesn't work. You're saying the Constitution was great. I'm saying that where you've got to is a result of your Constitution. So as a standalone document, piece of work, it looks amazing, like tolerance and religious freedoms and all of those things. It looks amazing. But unfortunately, 250 years of that has resulted in where you are now.
Well, yeah, it has resulted in where we are now. We are where we are. You know, I think the Constitution and protecting individual freedoms did a lot of good things. And and you've said it a few times, unfettered capitalism. You know, we've already explained that this isn't capitalism anymore. It's a blend of other things. So to blame
What
things
is that a
happening
blend of?
today, you know, you can't blame a system for the corruption. Like all systems are corrupt at one point or another. It's like a human trait. Humans are corruptible. When the founding fathers started the United States and wrote the Constitution, Declaration of Independence and all that, they tried to put the system together in a way that would avoid political corruption. And they even said that. They said the biggest weakness of this constitutional republic is politicians getting corrupted and politicians figuring out that they can basically buy votes, which is people are literally just did that. They went around canvassing saying, you'll get $2,000 check if you vote for this candidate. And you know that at that point it's not what it was meant to be. And you know, I think it would be too bad to throw out the baby with the bathwater. I think that protecting individual freedoms is the most fair way to organize a society. It's like that in nature. You know, in the natural world, it's like a free market. You know, no animal out there just gets everything given to them. They have to go out and work. They have to survive, right?
Okay, good. Yes. So when I talk about unfettered capitalism, I mean that. I mean the hideous corporatism and corruption that you're experiencing now is a result of ineffective or non-existent regulation of those industries and those markets. So for me, this is a progression from capitalism into this weird corporatism. And this is kind of what Marx said. Like Marx, we'll talk about Marx later. So absolutely, this is unfettered capitalism. This is too much focus on people's freedoms and not enough focus on their protections or their responsibilities. This is exactly the situation we've got to. And the other thing that you were saying is what were you saying about systems, like political systems from the ancient Greeks right through to, well, it doesn't seem like any thinking is going on about this now. They've always been about avoiding corruption, like preventing, limiting corruption, because like Francis Bacon said, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So this has always been the gig. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But I would say that American society is now arguably the most corrupt society on the planet. And I would say that seriously in terms of the number of people who are benefiting and the institutionalization of this corruption. Like people can't have healthcare because the insurance companies are making too much money. End of argument. Like we have to go to war with everyone because the industry is making too much money. End of argument. Like people don't get fresh water in Flint because somebody's making too much money. End of argument.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so it seems to me that as long as somebody's making some money, all is fair in the United States. Now you bring it to this nature argument, which is where it always comes down to, and I thought you were going to this before. Typically, people who are right-wing in their beliefs and believers in more freedoms believe that man by nature is kind of this horrible being that will eat his children, blah, 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 selfish, corruptible, blah, blah, like everything in nature. And people who have a socialist bent will say that human nature is much more positive than that, like people are good people. But I don't see anywhere in nature an animal that takes more from nature than they need. Okay? The only animal that I see that actually kills for sport is like a cat. Everything else kills because it needs to eat that thing. Like the closest you come to like stockpiling is squirrels when they collect nuts for winter. So nature is balanced precisely because everything in nature is taking what it needs and no more. And it's capitalism that has people taking everything they need from nature plus the profit, you know? Mm. So, and the other thing about the nature argument is that in the United States, you've got Jeff Bezos, and now I think that clown from South Africa, what's his name?
Musk.
Elon Musk, worth hundreds of billions of dollars. So they are, and the average family couldn't afford a $400 bill in the United States. So I don't know what 180 billion divided by 400 is, but it's a shit ton of money. It's like thousands of times bigger. So where do you see an instance in nature where there might be a forest and then this one forest with this one tree is tens of thousands of times bigger and more successful than all the other trees? It doesn't, we've gone way away from where nature is. Mm-hmm. That's what I would say to you. So the nature argument really...
The reason I bring up nature is because, you know, in complex systems, usually the best solutions are the simplest solutions. And so when we're managing societies of billions of people or millions of people, we have to make rules that are as fair as possible, right? You know, like, and there's not going to ever be like a perfect utopia where there's no pain or suffering. But, you know, I think...
Well, what about Holland? What about, and this is exactly the argument. So it's like, how interested is your society in avoiding pain and suffering? So in Holland, clearly they're very interested in avoiding pain and suffering for their people. And in the United States, they couldn't give a shit about the suffering of their people. And this to me is, that's the situation. They could not give a shit.
Well, first of all, about Holland, I'm sure there's some problems with Holland. Like, I don't live there, you don't live there, but I'm sure the people that live there can point out some things that aren't great. But
that's not what I'm saying. I'm accepting that there are likely to be problems in Holland, but what I'm saying is that society, reflected as their government, clearly is making an effort to avoid the pain and suffering of its people. Whereas if I look at your government, it looks to me like they could not give a shit about the pain and suffering of the people.
No, yeah, I would agree completely with that. I think that the United States is actually becoming more fascist than anything else. We've got corporations basically joining with the government. And, you know, just based on what I see, I would say that the people running the government don't give two shits about the citizens. And that's why one reason why people are so fed up and wanting to go storm the Capitol, because they feel like they've been left behind. You know, they're not being represented anymore.
No, and this is
Oh,
where
yeah.
you
I
get
thought
to
you
a point
froze.
where it becomes revolutionary. What's that?
I thought you froze. You were really still.
No, what you were saying was so profound, you stunned
I'm
me
so
into
sorry.
in movement. um, and that is exactly where you've got to. Like, this looks revolutionary. It looks like insurrection,
Mhm.
and I think it's I think it's really frightening. So even the most sensible, the most liberal Americans that I talk to, I'll have a conversation and I'll say, it's like this or it's like that. And they'll say, okay, cite your sources. And if one time it was like Russia Today, and the guy's like, not even considering that. And it's like, that is this kind of nationalism, that's this kind of patriotism where people are so dismissive of anything that doesn't come from the United States.
Or
And
that doesn't agree with their biases.
no, I think, but because people might have like a socialist bias, they might be Black Lives Matter people. I don't know. I haven't spoken to a Black Lives Matter person, but I can imagine I have a conversation. Yeah, Marxism. Yeah, blah 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 blah, and they'll still be like, yeah, but America's still the best country on the planet.
Maybe there seems to be a growing body of thought in the leftists in this country that America is like the worst place. And it's,
Yeah, and
I
I
mean,
mean, you're
most
at
people,
war with 8 countries now. You've been at war, I think, with 25% of the countries on the planet since the end of the Second World War. Like, I don't know what the death tolls are, but
yeah,
it's in the millions. Like,
I don't,
millions of people have died in wars with Americans.
never has there been a democratic vote from the people to go to war. Wars
No,
are waged by the same the same corrupt people that are making tons of money off of it. And
exactly. So
you
this is
know,
the military industrial complex. They're making too
yeah.
much money.
So
But
there's
that
like,
money is, like you say, that money is coming directly from the taxpayers. Now, who is it? There was somebody I saw recently saying that America fell into this war economy. I mean, they made a shit ton of money out of the end of the Second World War. So, like, by lending hundreds of millions, billions of dollars, whatever it was, to the states in Western Europe to rebuild themselves, and those countries are still repaying those debts now.
yeah,
So, and America fell into this war economy and got drunk on it and has been drunk on it ever since. I don't know if you've seen where, oh my God, I'm not going to get the names, but George Bush was with one of the South American, I think it was the Bolivian guy. And no, it wasn't. I think it might have been the Venezuelan guy. I don't know. Anyway, one of the communist socialist guys. And the guy's just like, we can't produce money for our economy. And George Bush said to him, go to war, start some wars.
hmm
So, it's accepted that the United States is funded largely by murdering innocent people in foreign countries.
yeah. And it's not just, war hasn't only been used as a way to bail out a crummy economy, but it's also been a way to get other nations, put them into a debt trap that they can never repay, and
Of
also
course.
to keep the citizens of America afraid of some outside threat. There's a lot of
Yes.
propaganda that's meant to keep people here afraid. And it's
Yes.
like, and I hear not just you, but a lot of people that it's like you say America, and it's like you're talking about everybody in America. Like we're all over here sitting around like, yep, let's go to war with them. But it's like the people of America don't make those decisions. And every presidential election we have, presidents don't seem to be elected. They seem to be selected. We don't really have a choice. We're giving two choices, and they're both basically on the same team. They both do the same things, that lead to the same shit. And
Yes.
I think it's beyond America. It's the corruption isn't just Americans. It's 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 globalists at this point. It's these corporations and people that they're doing this shit everywhere. America's just been like the biggest tool or the biggest tank on the board. And you know, it's, I don't think that that was not in the spirit of the Constitution and the founding fathers. That wasn't the goal, I don't think. And if it
I
was
don't
the
believe it
goal,
was the goal at all. I mean, that would be hugely insightful to be able to bring that about 250 years later. And I also don't think this is Americans. Like, I've never met an American. Okay, here's when I was surprised. I went to the United States in 1990. I went to Billerica near Massachusetts. And it was just after the start of the first Iraq War. Now, people in the UK, or certainly people that I was talking to, were shocked. This was clearly an illegal war. It was clearly an unnecessary war. And it was clearly an unjust war. And when I got to America and I started speaking to people, they're like, yeah, go us. We're going to fuck up the Iraqis. You know, it's like they were clearly in support of it. And when I saw all the flagpoles on people's lawns, I was shocked because in the UK, it was clearly accepted, understood that this was an unjust war and people were anti it. I'd been on marches like anti the war. And the thing is, and so this is, so I don't believe this is Americans. This is corporations who are driving this corruption. But that's why it surprises me, and maybe it's changing, but why it surprises me when I talk to quite liberal Americans and I cite Russia Today, or even if you're talking to somebody who's a Trumpist and you cite CNN, or if you talk to somebody who's a Democrat supposedly and you cite Fox, they're just so closed, like dismissive of, well, that's clearly not true. Do you know what I mean? So
yeah.
this is what surprises me. Absolutely, I know it's not Americans. American people like you, or any American probably. I can't imagine there being any American who is as pro-war as your government seem to be. So this isn't the Americans, but still you have. This is the conflict for me. Is you clearly this isn't policy that you want, but you still are hugely supportive of your country, of your government, and maybe that's changing. I hope it is.
Well, you know, this made me think of something that I've never thought of before. And, you know,
Good. That's what I was hoping for. I've won.
over here in America, well, let's start with over there in Europe, like the UK, Germany, Europe. You guys are way more worldly than we are here. You have exponentially more history. You're close together, like with countries that are completely different. You guys are exposed to so many different, probably ways of life and types of thinking. It gives you a unique perspective, and it probably makes it a little bit harder to propagandize you. Over here in the United States, we're super isolated. You know, Canada,
Yes.
you know, we only know what we see on TV. And it's no, I mean, as a marketer, I can see it everywhere, especially in the last 4 years. All the information is coordinated. And so people in the United States, I'm
Yes.
sure it was like this in the 90s, they were sold the war. They were convinced that it was the right thing to do, and they didn't know otherwise.
Yes. No, and I'm with you entirely. And this has come down to like 47% of Americans now apparently hold passports, whereas I was told like 30 years ago it was like 2%. So it is a very kind of insular kind of community, kind of society. But now 47% hold passports.
Yeah.
I do think, like what you were saying before, is that like capitalism needs certain mechanisms to sustain itself. One of them needs to be like an external threat. So during my lifetime, when I was a kid, we were shit scared of the Russians dropping nuclear bombs on us. Then it becomes the Iraqis, then it becomes global warming, then it becomes whatever it is, but it needs that external threat to keep everyone scared.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what they kind of do with these wars. But no country that you're at war with ever represented any kind of threat to America, maybe American interests in your oil consumption, but never to Americans.
Mm-hmm.
So it needs that. It needs this huge distraction, which is the circus of the news media. in the United States, the news media has just become a joke. I mean, they contradict themselves in the same news segment. You know what I mean? Like whoever this guy is, Cuomo, who's on CNN, is clear. I mean, it's just a joke. It's just a joke. But this is all distraction, and the sports. And I think what's going on now with this pandemic really exposes the quality of countries and the health of countries. So it's no surprise to me at all that America are getting kicked in the nuts by this, and the UK are getting kicked in the nuts by this, because it seems to me that those two countries are the ones that are furthest down this track, you know, of this corruption. And I think at least in the UK we have the veneer of respectability. You know, maybe people don't realize quite how corrupt it is, but in the States the gloves are off, like everyone can see. And in terms of, and this is now coming down to personality politics. So nobody makes a decision by looking at the policies. It's like either you hate Trump or you don't hate Trump. You know, it's like either you're a Trumper or you're not, because now you've just elected a really horrible person to be president of the United States. He clearly has an unhealthy interest in children. He wrote the 1994 crime bill, which has resulted in millions of Americans being in prison. His kid's a crack addict. His kid is clearly taking money from Eastern European states because he was the vice president. That's corruption. What else is wrong with him? He's clearly in some kind of mental decline. He has no policies. Like, he's been in government he's been the president for like 3 days. He's already reduced increased the amount of troops in wars abroad, whereas Trump was bringing them down. So the thing for me is, if you look at this sensibly and you take the personalities out of it, Trump was probably the most liberal president you've had since Jimmy Carter. You know, so people who think that they are liberal, who are voting for the Democrats, if they were looking at the policies and taking the two personalities out of it entirely, they would have been voting for Trump. Mm-hmm. But the Democratic Party, it seems to me, are more enslaved to these complexes, these industrial complexes, the wars, the prisons, the education, the medical care, than even the Republicans are. So basically, with all of this that's going on, electing Biden, giving the Democrats the House and the Senate, the United States has just gone right, like sharply right.
Yeah, it's what's
going
on.
And the people of the United States think that they've done a liberal thing.
What's going on here is it's supremely bizarre. Like over the last 4 years, there's been a constant onslaught against Trump in the media, and I started paying attention closer when they were like, one of them was, they said that he called dead World War II vets losers and suckers or something like this. This was a narrative that was driven really hard. And I was like, wow, that's kind of a messed up thing to say. So I went and listened to the speech, and he didn't say that. He didn't say it like they said he did, but they repeated it a million times. Biden repeated it during every single debate they had. And now when I talk to people, they remember him saying this, even though they never saw or heard him actually say it. And they did this with a bunch of different narratives. Not as many as you'd think. Like, I think there's only like 5 or 6 main narratives that they use and just drilled into people's heads. And so by the time it came time to vote, people weren't voting for Biden and his policies. They were voting against Trump. And some of them were voting to get a stimulus that was promised. But it really wasn't about policies at all. Biden didn't even really campaign. He wasn't on the campaign trail. When he did hold events, there was hardly anybody there. So it makes it really hard to believe that he actually won an election with the most votes of any president in history. I don't want to go down the election fraud thing, but I think it ties directly into all this other corruption we're talking about. And just looking at the results of what's already happened, the moment Biden got into office, troops going into other countries, wars heating up again, and that hasn't even been a topic of discussion in the news. So, I believe people are they're so manipulated into being divided right now that they really don't have any idea what's actually happening. And
they have no idea what's actually happening. And this is exactly my point. It's personality politics. It's because people don't and it's not even that they like Biden. It doesn't matter who the Biden candidate was or who the Democrat candidate was. It's because they don't like Trump.
And it's not even that they don't like Trump. It's they don't like who the media said Trump is.
Yes, exactly. Why don't you want to go into the election fraud thing?
I mean, we can, but it's
okay. This is all I want to say about fraud: is that there is, in any election there is fraud. So to say there was no fraud in this election is completely ridiculous. Of course there was. It's been demonstrated that in mail-in elections that there is 3 or 4 times as much fraud, and clearly there's 3 or 4 times as much opportunity. But you don't even need to look at that, because you look at the way the Democrats conducted themselves in the primaries. You look at the way they dispatched with your liberal guy. What's your supposedly liberal guy called? Bernie Sanders. Oh. That was clearly fraudulent. I saw a thing where they couldn't decide on the vote, so they tossed a coin, and it was the most you haven't seen a 3-year-old toss a coin like this. Like, the guy tosses the coin, he looks at it, he's like, okay, what you want to call it? Do you know what I mean? It's fucking insane. And the Democrats do this over and over and over again. Look at the way that Hillary Clinton hung Bernie Sanders out to dry in the last. So clearly the system is corrupt, and there is always corruption. And you're right. How is anybody supposed to have faith in this president when he hasn't? I mean, literally, the Obama administration inherited 2 wars and gave Trump 8. They started 6 new wars. They ran out of bombs to drop on people. They invented this droning thing. What about the whistleblowers like Assange and Snowden? The thing is, I think the principles that came from your Constitution are seriously under assault. And the American population has to be asleep at the wheel, because how can they not? You could say that they've duped an entire population. I think if you were to, and it's the same with my liberal friends in the UK, they were like, hooray, Trump's gone. And it's like, hooray, there's going to be more wars. Hooray, there's going to be less healthcare. Hooray, there's going to be more people in prison. Hooray, there's going to be you're supposed to be a fucking liberal. Pay attention to what actually is going on, because those things will all go up. Trump didn't manage to get rid of slightly more than half as many Mexican immigrants as Obama. Look at what's going on. But people just seem to be so distracted. And I think that's what it is. I think it's this weird patriotism and the distraction that goes on, and the media is all part of that circus. And now you've got people storming the Capitol.
Yeah,
it's insane.
Yeah, have you ever heard of a guy named Alan Dulles?
No.
He was the CIA director during the Reagan administration, and he's quoted as saying, "We will know our job is complete when everything the American people believe is a lie or is false."
Right.
So, I think the American people have been sold this idea that they're at the wheel.
Yes.
But it's not really the wheel. They're not really steering anything. And
they're not really at it.
No. And I think it's been like that a lot longer than anyone cares to admit. But
yes.
What really alarms me is how flagrant it is now. It's, for the people who are paying attention, it's so obvious that it's almost feels like they want to be caught. Like they want it to be obvious, or they don't care. They're going all in. They're pushing all their chips into the middle of the table. If it works out for them, it must be great, because if it doesn't, they're going to be hanged. You know what I mean? Like it's ultimately, it's crazy how far the corruption seems to be going. And what worries me is like, I don't know. It feels like the game's coming to an end, and they know it, but we don't know it. It's like they're going all in. It's crazy.
Yes.
So, with all this, the tech monopolies and stuff, it's like maybe we're getting to a point of no return when you won't have to get elected to keep the power anymore, because they've lit the whole thing on fire. It's burning down.
Maybe. So do you still believe then that the trouble with socialism is that it's been tried and it's never worked?
Well, I mean, socialism has been tried, and maybe the socialism I'm thinking of is what you call communism.
Right.
But I think socialism has a tendency to lead to communism.
Does it? Like clearly Holland is a communist state now. Norway, Sweden, the United Kingdom, all communist states. Nothing leads to communism. Do you know what I mean? But what you definitely know is that this situation in the United States leads to insurrection. And we're kind of seeing.
Well, there wasn't an insurrection.
Happening. Sorry?
There wasn't an insurrection.
No, but it leads there. What do you call it when people storm the Capitol?
I think
Just because they got there and they didn't have a good idea of what they were supposed to do. Took some selfies.
That was staged. I think it was bullshit. You have two cops holding back a crowd of 1,000 people. Like, if they really wanted to keep people out of the Capitol, they would have done it. And
all right. So, what do you call the Black Lives Matter movement calling for the abolition of the police force? What do you call that?
I call it insane. And it's weird.
Is that insurrection, calling for the removal of a function of government that's supposed to protect itself?
Well, let's see. Let me look at. Yeah, so I guess it would be. If the definition of insurrection is a violent uprising against an authority or government. The weird thing about the Black Lives Matter movement is that it was practically promoted by the same people calling the Capitol riot an insurrection. So why is it okay for Black Lives Matter to riot and burn down the buildings of businesses and people's houses? That's a good thing. That's a good riot. But it's bad when people storm the Capitol because they think that the election was stolen. And the whole Capitol thing, like the vast majority of the Trump supporters, they weren't going there to storm inside the Capitol and kill people. Like, I think that was like almost a false flag type thing to instigate and let that kind of thing happen.
Right. So I think that the frightening thing for me is that whether the storming the Capitol was an insurrection or not, I mean, there were people protesting the lockdowns and stuff before Black Lives Matter. So basically, you've got both ends of the scale out on the street, not like involved basically in, or certainly prepared to be involved in violent protest. And it doesn't matter. So of course the Black Lives Matter are going to say this one's really bad, and of course the right are going to say this one's really bad. It doesn't really matter. The tinderbox is the fact that they are both out on the streets, engaged in violent activity. So whether you call one an insurrection and the other one not an insurrection doesn't really matter. The point is you've got these two groups of people at both ends of the scale on the street. That's frightening. That is frightening. And that's astounding. So
yeah, I don't like it at all. I don't like the violence, and I really don't like the federal government becoming bigger and more powerful.
Yeah.
I don't want the federal government to go in and fill the streets with troops in order to keep the peace, because I don't particularly.
But they did that 20 years ago, man. They did that 20 years ago when they militarized the police. That's exactly what they did. When they wrote the 1994, 26 years ago, when they wrote the 1994 1994. Biden wrote the 1994 crime bill.
Yeah, I think he
And
wrote the
I was
Patriot
watching
Act, too.
this thing about crack yesterday. I don't know if you've seen it on Netflix. But what they say is that the black population, the number of black people incarcerated for drugs offenses increased 700% between 1985 and 1994. 700%.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's a frightening situation, man. It's a really frightening situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I don't know anybody that thinks that's good. And I'm pretty sure Biden wrote the Patriot Act too.
I think he might have done, yeah.
He wrote it years before 9/11, but when 9/11 came, they were ready to get that thing through. So I don't like any of that.
Google that.
I like smaller government and freer markets. Because just from what I see, the more the government gets involved, the more corrupt it is.
No. See, this is where I think, so the fear of giving people too much power is corruption. It's going to be like the power is going to become corrupted. So that's always been the fear. Always, always, always been the fear. But the situation in America it's that avoiding corruption has led to the most corrupt society, I think, that the world has ever seen. Literally, you're being run by people who are making billions of dollars. So, for example, the traditional arguments against socialism is that it can't be efficient. Like, there is nothing as efficient as the market. So you need the free markets with their efficiency, because everyone's just looking to make a profit and get it done as efficiently as possible, and that can't be done. And the other argument against socialism is that it will be corrupted. So if, for example, you were to say that Holland is a socialist country, are you prepared to accept that socialism has been implemented there and is working much more effectively than your system?
Well, I don't know if Holland is 100% socialist, is it?
No, but that is the point I'm trying to make to you, is that there is no 100% socialism. Socialism is the stopping point between communism and capitalism. Socialism is the middle way, where societies accept that some of the provisions to the people need to be controlled by the community because they are so necessary, like education, like healthcare, like transportation, like defense, like all of these things. So, yeah, so that's what I'm saying. No one would describe Holland as a socialist state. So let's just Google current socialist states. You've been to Vietnam, have you?
Yeah.
Yeah. How did you feel there?
Oh, I thought it was great.
Yeah, I loved it also. Really liked it. And it was really interesting. Like, the communism that's there, clearly there's like, it's run on capitalist grounds. There's free market, everyone's trading, everyone's working, everyone's doing their thing. But it's like they just don't have to be interested in politics. They don't have to even think about it, because the party's never going to change. The party, and they're achieving huge growth, aren't they, in Vietnam?
They have, I mean, I like countries like that because the government is weaker. I guess it's probably got its pros and cons, but in societies where you can pay the cop $20 to let you go after getting caught speeding, that could be a good thing sometimes. It allows for more personal freedom. I like that.
Yeah, and I like that, and that's what, like, I lived in Africa for a period of time. I'm staying in Bali now. I prefer to see and benefit from the corruption if it's going to be there. Like, it's always going to be there. Like, people say that the UK is the least corrupt state. What they don't understand is that the whole cake was divided up 300 years ago, and so you're never going to benefit from that corruption. Like, we've got the National Health Service, but something like 75% of the MPs from the governing party have an interest in breaking up the NHS and selling it off to private industry. And there's a real threat of that happening, I think, in the UK. Interestingly, if you Google socialist governments, they say the People's Republic of China, the Republic of Cuba, Lao People's Republic, and the Socialist Republic of Vietnam. So these are probably socialist, because they probably are socialist. These are left, obviously, of the Scandinavian countries. and then right of the Scandinavian countries are the UK, and right of everybody, I'd say, is the United States. I don't know. For me, it's happening on a scale. But the
Yeah.
better way to think
Well,
about it is socialist policy rather than socialist society.
yeah.
Because there's
And
never like a socialist then by their definition of country is going to be China under the Mao Revolution. That was socialism, where the state controlled everything.
yeah. I mean, like I said, I like smaller government. So that's probably the root of why I'm not a big fan of socialism, is because you're putting the responsibility in the hands of a bureaucracy that is always known to be not very good at most of the things they do. I've heard,
Okay, as opposed to putting your hands in a bureaucracy which is known to take everything they possibly can.
well, at least if it's a truly free market, then competition will lead to better, cheaper services, right?
But there is no truly free market. And certainly America isn't that. Like, for all of the money that the insurance companies make, the provision of healthcare, I think, in the States is twice as much as it is anywhere else in the world.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so that's the other argument that fails here, is that,
okay,
that the free market is more efficient, because what's demonstrated is that the free market in the United States is twice as expensive.
But you just said it's not a free market. So you can't say that a system that isn't a free market is a good argument against the validity of a free market.
Okay. All right. So let's put it this way. So what I'm advocating is a society that gives a shit about the people, the pain and suffering of those people, versus a society that doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you can say, so that is the basis of this argument. And by whichever measure you want to look at, America is failing. If you want to look at illiteracy rates, if you want to look at suicide rates, if you want to look at obesity rates, if you want to look at drug dependency rates, if you want to look at the number of veterans who commit suicide every year, the number of people who are in prison, the number of people who die every year because they don't have access to medical health, the number of people who are bankrupted every year trying to get access to healthcare, by whichever, the number of wars that you're involved in, by whichever measure you want to look at this, America is failing. So there is no such thing as a free market. And if there is a free market, if there ever was a free market in America, it gets you to where you are now. Okay, so the difference for me is it doesn't matter. It's actually, are you living in a society that has the sense to provide the things that the people need to avoid insurrection? And it seems to me that the United States, by some magic trick of disruption and lying and force, is narrowly avoiding insurrection at this moment in time. And it's not because the free market works, the free market doesn't work. It's because governments need to realize that they have to make provision for the people, or the society will fail.
I'd rather not put that power in the hands of the government and let the people do that.
Okay, so if you read Marx, so Marx is the father of communism. All he did essentially was write a critique of capitalism. Like, this is what's wrong with capitalism, and this is why it will fail. He wasn't a communist. He certainly wasn't prescribing communism, but he kind of looked at history as epochs. So you went through agriculturalism, you went into feudalism, you went into capitalism, and he said that the next epoch would be communism. Not that he was prescribing it, he wasn't saying, and he didn't say very much about what communism would look like. But what he said is that communism will follow the global failure of capitalism. Okay, so once capitalism is completely bust, there will be communism. And the way he described that is, there were kind of two things that he said. One thing that he said is that it would be small localized communities, like you're saying, taking care of themselves. And the other thing he said is that it will be from each according to their ability, to each according to their need, which might sound a little bit idealistic, but it sounds like common sense to me. So the communism that Americans are scared of is maybe the kind of communism that happened in the turn of the century, the last century in Russia, and the middle of the century in China and Asia and those kinds of places. But it follows the global failure of capitalism. And it seems to me that the reason capitalism hasn't failed yet is because of clearly socialist policies. So, for example, when the pandemic started and the recession started last year, they immediately put 5 trillion into the pockets of the largest corporations and the richest people in the United States and completely ignored the people. You know, this was the same in 2008. They propped up the banks and allowed the banks to put 5 million Americans out of their homes. You know, so what you've got in America is you've got socialism for the biggest corporations, and you've got the most frightening, not give a fuck capitalism for the poorest people. And so capitalism is being propped up by socialist policies. That's what I think is going on. I don't know why I started that or where I started or how it ended up there, but that seems to me to be the situation.
Okay. Well, maybe socialism is what happens when capitalism is on its way to communism. Because, you know, it's hard to, all these are like ideologies. Like capitalism is like a philosophical way of running, you know, running a society or an economy, like in a free market economy. So is socialism, so is communism. And to call America capitalism right now, it's not. It's multiple things. But then to blame the bad parts just on capitalism, it just doesn't make sense to me.
Well, what are the bad parts? What are the bad parts?
Man, you just rattled off like 10.
Exactly. And for me, the fault in all of those is corruption. It's the fact that there's profit to be made, capital to be made out of that corruption. So categorically, like if you look at the worst effects of your society, it's a capitalist ideal that has got you there. Now, I'm agreeing with you. I don't believe that this is capitalism, like free market capitalism, like it was described. But you were certainly, the ideal was to get to that capitalism, and you've gone beyond that to a corruption which is pretty horrific. I mean, your police force murder, is that the right word? Execute 1,000 people every year. You know, it's happened for the last 15, 20 years.
Yeah, but I mean, that sounds like the media, you know, people like then the black community members kill way more black community members than police do. Nobody talks about that.
Nobody talks about that. Okay, so why? I think people talk about that. People talk about black on black crime a lot.
They don't.
But the difference is you're interested in, like, supposedly you're interested in the freedoms of people against the government. But when the government murders, executes, whatever it does, 1,000 people every year, that isn't alarming to you. I mean, this is why you want an armed militia, isn't it? It's to protect yourself from the government. This is the government murdering 1,000 people a year.
I don't think we can look at any of these in isolation. You know, like there's a lot of forces at work that led to this situation. I like smaller government. I would like less cops. I would like less black on black crime. I don't think that the government's going to be able to fix that with more police or with welfare.
Okay. So your government isn't going to be able to fix this because your government is corrupt to the core. That's the issue. Like
No, it's not the government. It's that people are looking to the government to fix it, but it's the government's not going to be able to fix it. It's the social fabric of these communities that needs to be better. And the drug problem here is out of control. The war on drugs was a huge failure. Pharmaceutical companies, the biggest drug pusher on the planet. You know, all of these things work together. And I don't I don't think it was capitalism that put drugs into these communities. I think it was like the CIA, right? Weren't they the biggest heroin pushers? Like, so
And cocaine and crack pushers, yeah. But
yeah.
this is capitalism. Why were they doing that? I mean, I watched also the thing about on this crack thing. They were saying how Reagan was selling missiles to Iran and using the profits of that to fund the Contras in Nicaragua. So they were dropping weapons off in Nicaragua, filling the planes with cocaine, crack, and bringing it in. And literally, the judgment that had been made by that government was, we prefer to see our people dying on the streets than to see communism in Nicaragua. That's, yeah, I don't know. It's the pursuit of, it's corruption for me, which is about money, which is what capitalism is. Capitalism, shall I get a definition of capitalism?
Well,
Capitalism is literally the idea that you base society on there being capital profit. Okay, so an economic and political system in which a country's trade and industry are controlled by private owners for profit rather than by the state. And it's this profiteering which is at the root of all of these issues. So I'm not saying you're in a free market anymore. I think we've gone to some weird kind of corporatism, but it is capitalism that has afforded that opportunity.
So is
100%.
So is there not corruption in other types of political systems?
Well, this is the fear, is that there is, but this is the line that you walk. So the reason you don't want to give power to a government is because they could become corrupt and dangerous, like maybe the Russian communist government previously, or the Nazi government. They start running around murdering everyone. But at the same time, you have to have, this is the line you walk. But I'm saying that I can't imagine a more corrupt society than the United States right now. Society, government, like clearly, like Biden's just come out and said, no, I don't give a fuck about Medicare for all. Sorry?
I don't understand why it's capitalism's fault. You have all these other countries that have capitalism, but they don't, they don't seem to have the same problems, right?
Because they have more socialist policy. So this is exactly what I'm saying to you. Sorry?
We have socialist policies too.
But you only have socialist, the only real investment in socialist policies goes to giving more money to the people who are, to the richest people, to the people who are the most effective lobbyists, or to the people who have the politicians in their pockets. Yeah, those are the only really effective. Like you could say, okay, money's gone into government supported education, but has it gone in effectively? No. Like as effectively as the $5 trillion went into the pockets of the biggest corporations at the beginning of this pandemic? No, it hasn't happened. So you can talk about socialist policies, but they are not the fundamental, like the services that people absolutely need, healthcare, housing, education, they're all in the hands of private companies and they're all run for profit. So however effective they might be, I don't know what profit margin these people make, but whatever goes to the people, another 30% has gone to a tiny minority of people. And you have to accept that the United States has to be the most unequal society, because at one end of the scale, you've got Jeff Bezos with $160 billion. And at the other end of the scale, you've got somebody with absolutely nothing. And I'm saying purely from a sensible, common sense perspective, you have to take care of people, because otherwise they'll eat you like the French ate the French aristocracy during the French Revolution. It's common sense. Apart from, in the United States, they seem to think that it doesn't matter how unhappy those people are, they can manage that situation. You have a militarized police force, it's frightening, and it's frightening. Have I changed your opinion at all? Have I caused you even to think about these things? There are, like for me, there are no such thing as a socialist government in 2021. There are socialist policies, and countries, it seems to me, that implement more socialist policies are more successful than the United States, because I can't imagine anything being less successful in the United States right now.
Well, how did the United States become like the biggest superpower in the world?
By investing more in weapons than anyone else, by supposedly winning the Second World War, by putting all of the Western European nations in their pockets, by investing all of that money in huge swathes of that money into arms, and then going to war with a quarter of the countries on the planet over 60 years. That's how it happened.
That was,
and all of that happened for profit, which is capitalism, which makes it capitalism's fault.
well, weren't there wars before capitalism?
There were wars before capitalism, yeah, but there wasn't one country on the world that managed to go to war with 25% of countries in the world. That never happened. That's brand new to you.
What about like the Roman?
I don't know if there's been sorry.
What about the Roman Empire?
I don't think they went to war with with a quarter of the. The Roman Empire conquered the known world. The known world wasn't 25% of the countries in the world at that time. There weren't countries in the world at that time.
Mm-hmm. My point is that there's been many societies that took on massive war before capitalism was a thing. You know, we've talked a lot about like the negative aspects of like a free market capitalism, but there's been a lot of good things too, like the incredible amount of innovation that's happened that has given us the technology we have. Like, I don't know if that would have happened in a social.
What technology are we talking about?
Oh, like the internet, phones, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So, you know,
I don't know if that is good now. I'm at the point where I'm thinking about my life before the internet and before mobile phones.
Yeah.
And you know, so I don't know if I would laud those things as the innovations that have benefited humanity hugely. I mean, I'm not on where this social dilemma shit is, where they're saying this is the scourge that will take over the world. I think there's already too many scourges. But yeah. I wouldn't describe those things as great innovations that have really benefited humanity.
I don't think that there is any perfect system or perfect equilibrium. Now, I don't know how you would have a partially socialist, partially capitalist society that just stayed in one spot without moving one way or the other.
It will move all the time. But where you start is you start with the principle that either we give a shit about the people who make up our society, or we don't. Essentially, a society can only exist with the consent of the population. So, you know, and it's a kind of a trade. It's like, literally, it's a trade. It's like the people in a society, this doesn't happen literally, obviously, but people in a society say, look, we give up these freedoms and provide you with these responsibilities to create this kind of a state. And it seems to me that we're not talking about any kind of ideal. The United States is bang in trouble right now. Bang in trouble. It's hard to even imagine where this could end up. You've got both ends of the spectrum involved in violent action in the streets. You've got a government, you've got a president specifically does not give a shit about people or what they think. I don't know if you saw him on the campaign trail, but the answer he gave most regularly is, if you don't like it, well, basically, if you don't vote for me, you're not black. If you don't like it, go and vote for Trump. These were his most like common answers. Like he said that black children, that poor children should have every much as opportunity as white people. You know, he's clearly racist to the core. He's clearly in the pockets of these industrial complexes, and it's really hard to see now where it goes. But the United States, we're not talking about an ideal. We're talking about the most corrupt society, I think, on the planet, and potentially ever. Because, and you're right, like these systems are designed to avoid this corruption. But your system hasn't avoided the corruption. It is the most corrupt.
Yeah, but I think it goes way beyond just the United States. It's the technology and the internet has allowed a few people to sway masses all over the United States. Like, you're in Bali, you're from the UK, and you look at the news and you think, holy shit, there's people rioting on this side, there's people rioting on this side. What the hell's going on? But the fact is there's only a tiny bit of people doing these things with a million cameras on them, while everyone else is just living their lives going, this shit's fucking crazy. Like, we don't want this.
Yes.
And there, you know, the few people are able to control the information, and that's really it. Like, it's beyond capitalism or socialism or anything at this point. You know, the same. I just sit back and look at the commonalities between what's taught in colleges, what I see in the media, what I hear coming out of the mouths of politicians, and all those things that line up. Those have to be coming from somewhere. You know, all the media outlets in the United States can't be saying the exact same sentence on their own. Somebody's giving them that info. And so, I mean, I think it's...
So now we're going into
whether it's communism,
conspiracy maybe, but
at least in capitalism with a small government, you you are less likely to have, you know, millions of people getting killed by the government.
But your government are killing millions of people.
Well, our government's huge. I don't want huge government.
Right.
And the way I see it, the bigger the government gets, the bigger it gets. You know, like it's like a feedback loop. The bigger it gets, the faster it gets bigger. And that's one thing I don't like about socialism. I don't think we need to have laws that tell us to care about each other. I think that there's other ways of teaching people how to care about each other and take care of each other.
No. So it's not about having laws that teach people how to care about each other. It's about having policies that enable people to be cared for or otherwise. And you don't have those. You know, like thousands, millions of your population are just cast aside all the time.
How do you mandate care? Somebody has to provide that care. How do you mandate that? So
you say that we want this care to exist, and as a government, as a society, we're going to take care of making sure that we're going to enable that care to exist.
So, but how?
That's what happens. So that's what the National Health Services in the UK or the National Health Services in Northern Europe, that's what these things are, is saying that actually healthcare, and the way the National Health Service came about in the UK is it came about after the Second World War, where the government stepped back and said, look, this is a shit show what's happened. We're going to have to repay the people. And that's where social welfare came from. So we have unemployment benefits. So if you are unemployed in the UK, you will get some money. We have housing benefits. We have supplements to incomes. We have the National Health Service. And this was the government repaying a debt to the population that had just defeated Nazism. You know, but that never happened in the UK. So basically, if you're unemployed in the States, fuck you. You're sick, fuck you. You haven't got money, fuck you. You're homeless, fuck you. You know, that's the difference is about, you don't have to have huge government for the government to say, okay, healthcare, we're going to take responsibility for this thing. You know, we pay a specific tax in the UK, national insurance, which is 9%, I think, of income, which goes to funding the welfare state. So the idea is literally you put 9% in, if you get into shit, then we'll help you out. Now, I'm not saying that this is without corruption in the UK, because it clearly is hugely corrupt. And lots of the benefits I think that the government give out end up in the hands of the rich people anyway. But there is that sensibility, at least, that, you know, we are going to make an effort to make sure that the people in our society are cared for. And it seems to me that is entirely what's lacking in the United States. And millions of people suffer as a result of that. But it's a case of whether that establishment is so entrenched that it can bear this, it can extinguish any kind of insurrection, or it can ride any kind of insurrection, or it can do any kind of thing. But this isn't an idealist thing. This is like, basically, you have guns in America. One person with a gun can put a bullet in the president's head, or Jeff Bezos's head, or whoever's head. It just makes sense to make sure that people are catered for, because if they're not, bad shit can happen, and bad shit is happening in the United States. So it's not capitalism or communism. It's not big government or small government. It's the intention. It's how do you go about these things? Like, do you want to do the sensible thing and make sure people have the things that they need, especially if that's perfectly achievable Or do you want to be in a situation where two people have in excess of $160 billion and 175 million people don't have $400? Right? Is that a sustainable situation? And I think the answer's got to be not, because it looks like it's falling apart.
You said the word achievable, and I think that's one of the hangups I have. I don't know much about the healthcare system in the UK, but is it good healthcare? Is it pretty easy to go get healthcare?
Yeah, really easy. You just rock up at the doctors. There are waiting lists for certain treatments. There is still corruption. Like, by no means is the UK the best example. It's hugely inefficient. The pharmaceutical companies do have some kind of stranglehold on the provision of drugs and stuff. So it's by no means perfect, but it's free at the point of service. So there is not a person in the UK who cannot walk in and get the attention of a doctor. I mean, I don't know what's going on now with the pandemic, but in a normal situation, cannot go and get the attention of a doctor that day. We have A&E parts of our hospitals, and they are open 24 hours a day, and anyone can walk in and expect to be treated. You know, this is what happens, that we don't have these ambulance chases like you have, where an ambulance won't put somebody in the back of an ambulance if they aren't seen to have the means to pay for it. It's free at the point of service. Now, it's hugely inefficient. It's hugely underfunded. Like the Conservatives in the UK have been on a mission to fuck it up for the last 40 years. So it's by no means perfect, but like you have 45,000 people a year die because they don't have access to healthcare. We have zero because everyone has access to that healthcare. We might have people die because the specific healthcare they need isn't available or isn't available quickly enough. But you've got 45,000 people. We've got zero people die because they don't have access to healthcare. Like, you've got 2 million people in jail, and the Dutch have zero people in jail because they're managing these things differently.
Yeah, they have completely different populations too. I've heard people from Canada talk about coming to the United States to get healthcare because they couldn't get it in Canada. They couldn't get it fast enough or something.
Right.
So, I mean, that's like a logical argument is if healthcare is free for everybody, then everybody will go to the doctor for anything, and then there'll be so many people going to get it that it'll be impossible to get it. There won't be enough doctors to help everybody.
Yeah.
And
that
I know
think that would be an argument, but actually it's not what happens. People tend just to go to the hospital when they're sick, or the doctor when they're sick. And probably every doctor's got hypochondriac-like patients, and they deal with those people, but it's not a big enough percentage to make the thing not viable. You know, it's like, so this is kind of like the capitalist argument, is that people will take advantage, or people will be lazy, or people won't do what they. But the truth is, like you say, people are just getting on with their lives. They don't want to be seeing a doctor unless they're sick, you know? Man, have we gone for 2 hours already?
I don't even remember what time we started. Oh, yeah, we have. It's been about 2 hours.
It's been about 2 hours. We started at 7:30 my time. It's 9:33. I don't feel like I've convinced you of anything.
No, but you've definitely given me some things to think about. I think we're going to have to revisit this conversation because I need to do some research before we talk more about it.
Yes, let's revisit this conversation. But just know there is no such, like, well, so what you said previously about socialism having been tried and is not working, socialism is still happening in the People's Republic of China, the Republic of Cuba, Lao People's Democratic Republic, and the Socialist Republic of Vietnam, which we've both been to and we both enjoyed Vietnam. Okay, so by the harshest definition, it's working in those 4 places still. It might not be working well, but it's still happening.
But isn't
I'm telling you is that there's socialist policies are working effectively in hundreds of countries on the planet, and that's what the US needs to be. So please don't let me hear you say on your podcast again, the trouble is socialism's been tried and it's not working, because that's a trope. It's not true. You know, it's just not true. Now you turn the light up.
What?
I've been looking at a silhouette of you for the last hour and a half.
I didn't do anything.
Oh, you moved something, you got more light.
Oh, yeah, it's the camera.
Okay.
Well, yeah. So definitely, you know, when you said you were a socialist, I took that to mean that you believe in that every country, or that the best system is strictly socialism. But
No, I don't believe
your
that.
opinion is more of it takes a blend of different systems, and that the sweet spot is somewhere in the middle of socialism and capitalism. And I would say that I'm open to socialism. You know, I think if
Good, because when I heard you 2 weeks ago, you said it's been proven not to work anywhere ever. I'm happy with that. Let me go and get some breakfast when I'm starving.
All right. Thanks, Martin, for tuning in. Let's revisit this soon.
I've really enjoyed this chat. I hope you have. The thing about this is, it's like, how do you have these conversations? You can't have these conversations with people anymore because people are so polarized that they're triggered by. Do you know what I mean? You can't have these conversations. So it's almost like you have to have these conversations as like entertainment, because otherwise you can't have these conversations. Man, I'm looking forward to round 2. Let's do that.
All right, man. Sounds good. Thank you so much.
All right, buddy. Love you.
Love you.